Welcome, friend, to this peaceful hour. A moment to breathe, to slow down, to let the rush of the world fade into background. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of time, gently, thoughtfully, and stepping into a world far from our own, yet still deeply human. Whether you're getting ready to sleep or just easing into your evening, I'm truly grateful you're here. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're listening from, what city, what country, and what time it is as you press play. It never stops amazing me how history connects people across continents and time zones. And if stories like these bring a little calm to your day, consider subscribing. We've got many more journeys into the quiet corners of history waiting for you. Now, picture this. You're walking through the streets of ancient Rome. It's the peak of summer. The sun is brutal, beating down on marble columns and endless brick buildings. The air shimmers with heat, and every breath tastes like dust. Your toga clings to your skin, damp with sweat. All you want, more than anything, is to feel clean again, to cool off, to wash away the grime of the day. So, naturally, you head to the local bathhouse. After all, this is Rome, the capital of the most powerful civilization the ancient world ever knew. These people built aqueducts that stretched for miles, carried fresh water across mountains, even constructed architectural wonders like the Colosseum and the Pantheon. Surely their bathing habits must have been just as advanced, spotless, luxurious, civilized, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, prepare to have your illusions shattered, because Roman baths weren't just less clean than you think. They were downright disgusting. We've all seen the movies. Immaculate marble pools, sparkling water, Roman elites lounging as soft steam curls around them. Maybe they are discussing philosophy. Maybe they are sipping wine. Whatever the scene, it feels elegant, sophisticated, the height of ancient hygiene. But here's the truth about history. The further back you go, the more everything starts to smell. Literally, the reality of Roman baths isn't just mildly gross. It's stomach-turning. The kind of gross that makes you grateful, deeply, profoundly grateful, for your modern shower and your private bathroom. Let's start with the biggest issue, shared water. In Rome, you didn't get your own tub. You didn't get a fresh refill. You bathed, naked, with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other people in the same water. Water that wasn't filtered. Water that wasn't chlorinated. Water that wasn't even changed regularly. Sometimes, not for days. People came in after sweating through the Roman streets, covered in dust, grime, body oils, some even carrying infections. They scrubbed themselves, splashed around, and then the next person got in. Then the next. Then the next. Imagine your local gym pool, but instead of lifeguards and chlorine, it's just bacteria soup, a hot tub of human runoff. But that's only the beginning. You see, Romans didn't bathe because they were obsessed with being squeaky clean. In fact, they believed being too clean was unhealthy. They thought that dirt and sweat were natural, even beneficial. So even their idea of washing wasn't what you might hope for. Their bathing ritual went something like this. First, they'd rub themselves down with oil. Yes, oil, not soap. Then, they'd use a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape the oil, sweat, and dirt off their skin. Sometimes, servants did this with the wealthier bathers. And guess where all that oily sludge went? Into the bath water, into the pool, into the same water everyone else was soaking in. Still feeling relaxed? And we haven't even talked about the sponge sticks. Yes, Romans used sponge-top sticks, called tessoriums, instead of toilet paper. These were shared, communal, stored in a bucket of vinegar water. And while they weren't used in the baths, they were kept nearby in the public latrines, often right next to the bathhouse entrances. You'd better hope the last person remembered to rinse it well. Then there's the foot traffic. Roman baths weren't just for bathing. They were full-blown social hubs. You could get a massage, eat a snack, play a game, gossip, do business, all in the same building. People wore sandals, sure, but the floors were filthy. Mud, blood, bodily fluids, you name it. And it all ended up in the water eventually. The bathhouses also weren't gender segregated in the way you might assume. While rules varied across time and region, there were often mixed-gender hours or even fully co-ed facilities. That meant even more people crammed into these tepid pools, increasing the likelihood of diseases spreading. and diseases did spread. Skin infections, parasites, lice, and all kinds of fungal problems were rampant. Even the great physician Galen warned about the health risks of public baths. But they remained wildly popular, even essential to Roman daily life. Because for all their filth, the baths weren't just about hygiene. They were about ritual, identity, and community. To be Roman was to go to the baths. The poorest citizens used them. The richest emperors used them. There were enormous bathhouses that could accommodate thousands. Some had heated floors, domed ceilings, intricate mosaics. They were architectural marvels, cultural icons, even spiritual centers. But they weren't clean. And that's what makes Roman baths so fascinating. They force us to confront a hard truth. Our modern ideas about hygiene are incredibly recent. For most of history, people didn't bathe to stay clean the way we think of it. They bathed for ritual, for relaxation, for health, as they understood it, or simply because it was tradition. We romanticize the past, imagine it as golden, refined, and noble. But the truth is far messier, much sweatier, much smellier. And that's what we do here. On Boring History, we take the glittering myths of the past and look at them up close until the cracks start to show. Not to ruin history, but to make it human again. Because even the grandeur of Rome was built on muddy feet and shared sponge sticks. So the next time you're in your clean shower with hot water and soap all to yourself, be grateful. You've come a long way from the communal grime of ancient Rome. Thanks for joining me on this strange and slightly gross journey. Sleep well, and maybe take a shower first. Imagine stepping into a massive Roman bathhouse. The marble gleams. The ceilings arch high above. There's laughter, splashing, the low hum of political whispers and deals being made. At first glance, it looks like a spa day in paradise. But what if I told you it was more like a dip in a disease-ridden soup? Let's start with the tools. Romans didn't use soap. That's right, no bars, no suds, no lather. Instead, they slathered their bodies in olive oil, not to moisturize, but to clean. Then they grab a strigil, essentially a curved bronze scraper, and rake the oil off their skin, supposedly dragging dirt and dead skin with it. But here's where things get stomach-churning. These tools, they weren't personal. People shared them. Strigils passed from armpit to armpit, groin to groin, body to body, carrying every bit of bacteria, fungus, and parasite along with them. And it didn't stop there. The oil, too, was communal. Big jars of it sat open in the changing rooms. People dipped in, covered themselves, scraped off, and then someone else came along and did the same thing. No rinsing, no cleaning, just human grime passed around like a bottle of cheap cologne. But things get even worse when we look at what archaeologists have found. We tend to imagine Roman baths as glittering sanctuaries of cleanliness and class. But the ruins tell a different story, one of filth, disease, and danger. Excavations of Roman bathhouses have uncovered staggering amounts of human waste. Not just a little leakage, heaps of it. Enough to suggest that people were straight up using the pools as toilets. Parasites were everywhere. Traces of intestinal worms, lice, fleas, skin diseases, fungal infections. Anything that could thrive in warm, wet, human-packed environments thrived in Roman baths. These places weren't sanctuaries, they were biological war zones. And Romans knew it. Ancient doctors actually wrote about it. They warned of eye infections, skin rashes, digestive illnesses, and mysterious fevers that swept through public bathhouses like wildfire. But still, people kept going. Why? Because bathing wasn't really about getting clean. It was about being seen. Bathing was a performance, a social ritual, a way to show that you were Roman, cultured, important. Politicians sealed deals in the steam rooms. Merchants found business partners while soaking in tepid pools. Artists, philosophers, senators, even emperors, lounged in the same dirty water as everyone else, not because it made them cleaner, but because it made them look connected. But not everyone experienced the bathhouse the same way. You see, class mattered. A lot. The wealthy bathed early, when the water was relatively fresh. The poor? They came later, after the elite had gone. That meant wading into water that had already marinated hundreds of other bodies. Imagine waiting in line just to immerse yourself in what was basically warm human soup. Sloughed off skin, body oils, parasites, stewed together all day. And this wasn't just gross, it was humiliating. The class divide was baked into the system. The further down the social ladder you were, the filthier your bath. But don't feel too sorry for the rich. Because even if you were first in line, even if you had the finest strigil and the purest oil, you were still soaking in a system built on shared filth. The water was never filtered. It wasn't chlorinated. Pools were rarely entered. You bathed in yesterday's bacteria, and probably last week's too. And if you think all of this is bad, wait till you hear what else people did in the baths. They ate there, full meals, grapes, bread, meat, right in the water. They brought their kids, their slaves, their dogs. They held business meetings while lounging in waist-deep water that had more germs than a modern soul. The bathhouse wasn't just a spa. It was a Roman version of a shopping mall, office, playground, and restaurant all rolled into one. And none of it was sanitary. So how did this happen? How did one of the greatest civilizations in history get hygiene so disastrously wrong? The answer lies in how Romans thought about bathing. To them, it wasn't about removing germs. They didn't even know germs existed. It was about looking good, feeling good, and being seen doing both. It was about olive oil and conversation, warm water and warm gossip. It was a show of class, not cleanliness. And in the absence of germ theory, they thought scraping off some oil with a bronze tool meant they were clean. They didn't realize they were just spreading everything around, redistributing the filth like butter on bread. In the end, Roman baths were a paradox, glorious monuments to engineering, culture, and vanity, and at the same time, disease-ridden traps that made people sick. They tell a story that's eerily familiar, about how appearances can deceive, about how tradition can blind us, and how even the most advanced societies can miss the obvious when it comes to public health. So the next time you step into a clean, chlorinated pool, spare thought for the Romans, lounging proudly in their marble cesspits, believing they had mastered cleanliness, when in truth, they were soaking in their own downfall. The Roman Empire was known for its architectural wonders, powerful armies, and grand cities. But beneath that polished marble surface, one of its proudest cultural achievements, the public bath, was a bubbling cesspool of disease, filth, and bizarre hygiene rituals. These bathhouses were more than places to get clean. They were social hubs, packed from morning to evening with people from every class, senators, merchants, laborers, and slaves. But imagine for a moment the reality of that scenario. Hundreds of people sweating, scraping, and soaking together in lukewarm water, all of them bringing their own germs, bacteria, skin conditions, and parasites into the mix. It was less a symbol of cleanliness and more a biological disaster disguised as a wellness routine. The physical evidence doesn't lie. Archaeological digs at ancient bathhouses have unearthed layers of grime, human waste, and biological contaminants. Written accounts from Roman physicians describe outbreaks of skin diseases, eye infections, and worse. And by the late stages of the Roman Empire, even the Romans began to realize something was very wrong. Laws were passed to try to regulate the baths. Attempts at sanitation reforms were made. But by then, the damage was deeply woven into daily life. Public bathing was so culturally ingrained that meaningful change was nearly impossible. And then something surprising happened. When the Roman Empire collapsed, its iconic public bathhouses shut down. At first glance, this might seem like a step backwards. But in some ways, personal hygiene actually improved. With no more communal pools of contaminated water, people turned to more private, if simpler, methods of staying clean. And while medieval hygiene had its own well-documented issues, the end of the Roman bath culture meant the end of one of the most effective disease transmission systems in human history. So next time someone praises Roman bathing as a pinnacle of ancient hygiene, remember this. Behind the elegant architecture and marble columns was a festering stew of filth. It was a public health nightmare cloaked in sophistication. But believe it or not, what we've covered so far is just the surface. Let's go deeper into the grimy reality of Roman hygiene, a world where things only get more disturbing. Let's start with personal cleaning. Wealthy Romans would hire slaves, called capsariae, to accompany them to the baths. While their primary role was to guard valuables, They were also expected to assist with intimate cleaning tasks that most people today would never assign to another human being. These slaves would help scrub their masters with a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper used to remove oil and dirt. Sounds practical, until you realize that strigils were rarely cleaned between users. And if you think that's bad, just wait. The Romans had some deeply questionable beliefs about bodily fluids. One of the most shocking? Their use of urine as a cleaning agent. That's right, urine was so prized for its supposed disinfectant and whitening properties that it was collected in public containers and sold. Wealthy citizens used it to whiten their teeth. Yes, you heard that right. Ancient Romans rinsed their mouths with urine for dental hygiene. Some even drank it, specifically their own fresh morning urine, as a kind of medicinal tonic. It was believed to contain healing properties. Roman poets like Catullus mocked other cultures for their urine habits, but the Romans themselves weren't any better. To top it off, there was a tessera, the infamous Roman toilet sponge. After using a public latrine, Romans would wipe themselves with a sponge attached to a stick, dipped in a communal bucket of vinegar or salt water. There wasn't one sponge per person. Oh no. These sponges were shared, rinsed, and reused by dozens of people throughout the day. The result? A perfect pipeline for spreading intestinal parasites, bacterial infections, and skin diseases. And these weren't isolated practices. This was daily life. Latrines were often located near kitchens or water sources, and the water used in bathhouses wasn't changed frequently. Diseases didn't just linger, they flourished. It's no surprise that many scholars today believe Roman baths were breeding grounds for typhoid, dysentery, and parasitic infestations. What's especially fascinating is how Roman civilization managed to build such advanced aqueducts, roads, and cities, while simultaneously embracing hygiene practices that would horrify any modern health inspector. This brings us to a deeper point about history. Progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes what looks like advancement, gleaming marble baths, architectural wonders, elite rituals, is actually a well-dressed step backward. Sometimes, civilizations develop systems that seem brilliant, but are fundamentally flawed in the most human way possible. Yes, the Roman baths were incredible feats of engineering. Yes, they played a massive role in Roman social life and identity. But they were also public health disasters wrapped in luxury. And what we've explored today is only part of the story. We haven't even touched the strange superstitions, the secret rituals, or the disturbing medical treatments practiced in and around these bathhouses. There's an entire world of ancient hygiene yet to be uncovered, and believe me, it only gets more stomach-turning from here. So tonight, when you step into your clean, private shower, with water that flows fresh from the tap and drains away without fuss, take a moment to appreciate it. No strigils, no communal urine buckets, no shared toilet sponges. Just you, your soap, and a level of sanitation that would have seemed like magic to even the richest Roman emperor. Because in the grand timeline of human civilization, your bathroom is a modern miracle. When we think of the ancient Romans, we often picture grand marble structures, brilliant engineering, and a love for bathing that bordered on obsession. But behind this image of refinement lies a reality so revolting, it's hard to believe it was ever considered civilized. Let's start with their public toilets, disgusting by today's standards, and even then, they were far from hygienic. These communal latrines were built with flowing water underneath the seats, which sounds sanitary, until you realize that same water system was often connected to the kitchens and drinking fountains. The waste didn't always flow away. It backed up, it overflowed, and it became a breeding ground for parasites and lethal bacteria. Imagine getting a drink of water in Rome from a system tainted by human waste. Yet the Romans prided themselves on their bathing culture. They built massive bathhouses with intricate heating systems called hypocores, designed to warm the floors and walls. Impressive? Absolutely. Sanitary? Not even close. The heat and moisture created the perfect environment for bacteria, fungi, and disease. The air was thick, humid, and filled with microscopic dangers. These luxurious spas quickly became public petri dishes. And here's the terrifying part. The Romans knew. Physicians like Galen warned about the health risks, especially for the wounded or immunocompromised. But the social pressure to be seen in the bath was overwhelming. Important deals were struck there, reputations were built. Even the sick dragged themselves in, not for relief, but for acceptance. Their bathing rituals were just as bizarre. Since soap didn't exist, Romans used olive oil mixed with perfumes. They'd coat themselves in this mixture, then scrape it off using a curved tool called a strigil. But this wasn't freshly pressed olive oil. It was rancid, festering in amphorae for months. The result? A greasy, bacteria-laden paste made of spoiled oil, dirt, sweat, and skin. More of a health hazard than a cleanser. And that's just the beginning. The Romans believed in medicinal baths, some filled with sulfur water, others with milk, wine, or even animal blood. Yes, blood. Wealthy citizens would immerse themselves in the blood of freshly slaughtered bulls or pigs, thinking it would cure everything from rashes to insanity. The clean-up afterward was almost non-existent. Future bathers were, quite literally, swimming in diluted blood. But perhaps the most disturbing of all was the Roman tradition of communal vomiting. In between courses of their feasts, which often took place right inside the bathhouses, the elite would excuse themselves to special rooms called vomitoria and force themselves to throw up. Not out of sickness, but to make room for more food. Then they'd return to the baths, refreshed and ready to eat again. Slaves would clean up the mess, sort of, but the acidic residue often lingered, mixing with the already steamy, bacteria-rich air. Imagine standing barefoot on a marble floor smeared with remnants of vomit and spoiled oil. Even worse were the class distinctions. The wealthiest bathed first, enjoying clean water. As the day went on and more people entered, the pools became increasingly contaminated. By evening, when the lower classes were finally allowed in, the water had turned into a murky, greasy soup. It was filled with dead skin, hair, body fluids, and God knows what else. Some reports describe evening bath water so thick and foul, it no longer looked like water at all. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pompeii confirms just how bad it got. Drain systems were choked with hair, bits of jewelry, and decaying organic matter. The pool floors were laid with ancient grime that hardened into stone over the centuries. Modern chemical analysis of these residues reveals sky-high levels of dangerous bacteria and parasites, so toxic they'd be classified as hazardous waste a day. And it didn't stop in the cities. Roman soldiers were so obsessed with bathing, they built temporary bathhouses during military campaigns. No matter where they camped, they'd find a water source, any source, and set up makeshift baths. But without proper plumbing, drainage, or filtration, these were breeding grounds of disease. Many outbreaks in Roman military camps were directly linked to these unsanitary baths. Now here's what's truly baffling. The Romans were master engineers. They built aqueducts to transport fresh water over vast distances. They understood hydraulics. They created central heating. But somehow, they never connected the dot between hygiene and disease. They never thought to change the bath water more than once a day. They never separated the sick from the healthy. In fact, Roman doctors often prescribed public baths for the ill. Patients suffering from skin infections, leprosy, and even plague were encouraged to bathe right alongside the general public. These bathhouses weren't just places of social gathering. They were disease distribution centers. And the people loved it. They embraced it. They believed bathing was the height of civilization. But in reality, it was a daily dive into filth, bacteria, and death. What we often romanticize as a golden age of hygiene and sophistication was, in many ways, a horrifying misstep in public health. Behind the marble columns and warm pools lay a system so flawed, it endangered the very lives of those who built it. So the next time you imagine the elegance of ancient Rome, just remember, beneath the glittering baths and gleaming tiles was a nightmare of rot, illness, and denial. The disgusting truth about Roman baths, a health nightmare in marble. We tend to romanticize ancient Rome, a world of gleaming marble, flowing togas, and grand bathhouses filled with laughter and luxury. But peel back the polished stone and warm waters, and you'll find something far more horrifying, a public health disaster hidden beneath the bubbles. When the Roman Empire collapsed, you'd think Europe descended into filth and chaos. But here's the ironic twist. Hygiene actually improved. With the fall of the elaborate Roman bathhouse culture, people turned to private washing with clean water. Medieval Europeans, often mocked as dirty and backward, were actually far more hygienic than their Roman predecessors. They changed water frequently, wash with linens, and practice cleanliness in ways the sophisticated Romans never fully grasped. Roman baths, for all their elegance, were essentially luxurious soul pits. The architecture was stunning, yes, but all that beauty masked a festering truth. Bathers soaked together in massive pools of warm, stagnant water that collected bodily fluids, sweat, oils, dirt, and diseases from hundreds of people at a time. No filtration, no chlorination, no health codes. Just a human soup of infection waiting to happen. Even Roman medical writers like Celsus noted the rise of skin diseases, eye infections, and digestive illnesses among regular bathers. But despite these warnings, no one changed a thing. Bathing wasn't about health. It was about socializing, status, and ritual. Public baths were centers of Roman life, and to question them was to question Rome itself. And it gets worse. After you finish soaking in the warm, contaminated water, your next step wasn't a towel or a shower. It was a strigil, a curved metal scraper that looked like a cross between a butter knife and a torture device. The Romans believed this tool was the height of hygiene. They'd slaughter themselves in olive oil, sometimes mixed with sand or crushed pumice, then scrape it all off with a strigil to remove dirt and dead skin. But here's the horrifying part. These strigils were shared, passed from person to person, often without being cleaned. Imagine using a metal blade still coated with the oil, sweat, and skin of the previous user. You drag it across your own skin, opening tiny cuts and abrasions. Perfect entry point for bacteria and viruses. It was like playing Russian roulette with infections. And then came the sponge. Romans used natural sponges for cleaning themselves, during bathing, after scraping, and even after using the toilet. Yes, the same kind of sponge was used across all activities. In some cases, the same sponge was used. Meet the tesorium, a communal toilet sponge attached to a stick. Public toilets in Rome were long stone benches with holes. People sat side by side, did their business, and cleaned themselves with the shared sponge, rinsed in either a stream of running water or a bucket of stagnant, bacteria-laden sludge. Then it went back into rotation. No soap, no disinfectant, just a sponge in your imagination. What's more, the olive oil use for bathing wasn't just for luxury. Romans believed it cleaned the body, though it really just loosened the dirt. Combined with sand or pumice, it became an abrasive paste that stripped away the outer layer of skin, along with any protective barriers your body naturally had. Then they'd scrape that gunk off with a shared strigil and call it a day. Wealthy Romans had access to imported oils from across the empire, infused with fragrances and herbs. But even with their elite grooming rituals, the fundamentals remained the same. No soap, no sterilization, and plenty of shared tools. Rich or poor, most Romans bathed in filth. And all of this happened inside places we often admire today, vast marble halls with intricate mosaics, columns, fountains, and underfloor heating. The baths were marvels of engineering, but engineering isn't the same as understanding health. The Romans could build aqueducts to carry water across miles, yet they couldn't grasp the concept of germs or basic sanitation. They saw their baths as symbols of culture and civilization. In truth, they were incubators of disease. Tuberculosis, leprosy, parasites, and skin infections spread rapidly in these communal waters. Children, the elderly, and the immunocompromised suffered most, yet nothing changed because status and tradition came first. Today, we look back on Roman baths with awe, but modern swimming pools and spas have something the Romans never had: chlorine, filters, pH balance, and public health regulations. Without them, we'd just be recreating the toxic cesspools of ancient Rome, with better tiles. The story of Roman bathing isn't just about dirty water and bad hygiene. It's a lesson in misplaced priorities. The Romans prided themselves on innovation, yet ignored the most basic principles of health. Their obsession with appearances blinded them to the dangers beneath the surface. So next time you dip into a clean, well-maintained pool, take a moment to thank the science behind it. Because 2,000 years ago, luxury and disease swirled together under the marble ceilings of Rome. The baths were beautiful, but beauty couldn't master rot. True civilization isn't about marble monuments or complex engineering. It's about protecting the health of everyone, not just the image of the elite. And if history teaches us anything, it's that ignoring public health in the name of tradition or status always comes at a terrible cost. In ancient Rome, Public bathhouses weren't just places to get clean. They were social hubs, status symbols, and a vital part of daily life. But behind the marble columns, fragrant oils, and steaming pools was a system far dirtier and deadlier than most people realize. To the Romans, pleasant smells meant health and cleanliness. So instead of washing, they doused themselves in exotic oils and perfumes. These scents masked the stench of unwashed bodies, but they didn't clean anything. In fact, the oils trapped dirt and sweat, creating a greasy layer on the skin. Without actual soap or water, bacteria thrived in this sticky film. People thought they smelled good, but they were walking incubators of disease. Archaeological digs in places like Pompeii have uncovered the ugly truth. Researchers found ancient strigils, metal tools used to scrape off oil and grime, still caked with layers of human residue. The tools were so encrusted that bronze had corroded into green, crusty layer from decades of contact with bodily fluids. It wasn't just gross, it was dangerous. The bathhouses themselves were no better. Modern scientists have examined the floors and drains of Roman baths and found microscopic evidence of parasites, intestinal worms, and disease-causing bacteria. Communal pools were basically petri dishes of infection, and things only got stranger. The wealthy elite didn't just bathe in water. They soaked in wine, convinced it had purifying powers. Others took it further, mixing their baths with animal blood, believing it would give them strength and vitality. Some bathhouses even offered treatments involving urine. Yes, both human and animal urine, which was thought to cure everything from skin problems to toothaches. One of the most famous Roman physicians, Galen, actually endorsed these bizarre methods. He prescribed heated mineral baths mixed with sulfur, water so toxic it would be banned today. He also promoted bloodletting in these communal pools. Patients would bleed into the water, convinced that releasing bad humors would restore balance to the body. And all of this happened while others bathed just a few feet away. But perhaps the most disturbing part wasn't what went into the baths. It was who got to use them, and when. Roman society was strictly divided by class, and bath time reflected that divide. The wealthy enjoyed clean water in the mornings. By the time the poor were allowed in during the evening, the bath had become murky soup, filled with sweat, oils, skin flakes, and bodily fluids from hundreds of others. The poor paid what little they had to soak in this cesspool, believing they were partaking in the height of civilization. Meanwhile, bathhouse attendants enforced the schedule with military precision. Status decided not just how you lived, but how clean or filthy you were allowed to be. This wasn't just bad hygiene. It had serious consequences. Modern epidemiologists have studied Roman skeletons and found clear evidence of widespread skin diseases, parasitic infections, and waterborne illnesses. And the more often someone visited the public baths, the more likely they were to suffer from these issues. Frequent bathers weren't healthier. They were sicker. Even in ancient times, there were people who saw the danger. Some Roman doctors warned about the risks of communal bathing. Pliny the Elder even wrote about how disease spread quickly among bathhouse regulars. But those warnings were ignored. Why? Because status and tradition mattered more than science. Being seen in the baths was part of Roman social life. If you skipped them, you were considered uncivilized. Ironically, when the Roman Empire fell and the bathhouses collapsed, things improved. In the chaos that followed, people went back to private washing, using clean water, soap made from animal fat and plant ash, and simple hygiene methods. The so-called barbarians who overthrew Rome were actually cleaner and healthier than the Romans they conquered. This story reveals a hard truth about progress. It isn't always what it seems. The Roman baths were massive feats of engineering. They had heated floors, aqueducts, and architectural wonders. But all that brilliance was built on a system that made people sicker. Because no matter how beautiful or advanced something looks, if it's not grounded in good science and common sense, it can cause more harm than good. The Romans thought they had reached the peak of civilization. But while they soaked in blood, oil, and urine, they were spreading disease and weakening the society from the inside out. So next time you step into your private shower, clean water, real soap, your own space, remember, real progress isn't just about building big things. It's about making sure those things actually make us healthier, safer, and better off. Ancient Rome built a grand empire, but when it came to hygiene, their pride led them into filth. And history reminds us, Sometimes the simplest solutions are the smartest ones. So far, we've explored the architecture, customs, and social rituals of Roman baths. But now, it's time to talk about the darker, filthier side. Because what we've seen up to this point, that was just a clean version. Let's talk about what really happened inside those marble holes. And I promise you, once you know, you'll never look at a Roman bath the same way again. Let's start with the water. You might picture Roman baths with glistening, clear pools. Calm, inviting. But that shimmering surface? It was an illusion. That water had been sitting there, unchanged, for weeks, sometimes months. The Romans had this strange belief that as long as fresh water was slowly flowing in and old water trickled out, the whole thing sort of cleaned itself, like a natural rinse cycle. No need to drain the pools or scrub anything down. Sounds logical, until you realize that trickle was nowhere near enough to actually clean the water. What you really had was a slow circulating soup of human filth, constantly warmed to the perfect temperature for bacteria to thrive. It was like a petri dish the size of a public swimming pool. Modern scientists have studied residue found in the plumbing and floors of Roman bathhouses. What they found? Bacterial contamination that was absolutely off the charts. Per cubic inch, the water contained millions of microorganisms, parasites, pathogens, even intestinal worms. If you had dipped a microscope into the pool, you'd probably scream. And here's the kicker. That water wasn't just teeming with invisible microbes. It was full of very visible, very human grime. Because the Romans had a little pre-bathing ritual they called sweating. Before jumping into the main pool, bathers would sit in steam rooms called laconica or superheated dry rooms known as sudatoria. They'd sweat a lot. That was the point. But the moment they walked out of those steam rooms, they didn't rinse off. They went straight into the pool. Imagine it. Dozens, even hundreds of people pouring sweat, oil, and body filth into the same communal bath. Dead skin, grease, grime, it all washed straight into the water. No filters, no showers, just centuries of communal funk. The Romans thought this was good for the body. In reality, it was a full body soak in other people's waste. And speaking of waste, brace yourself. It wasn't just sweat and dirt in the water. The Romans also believed that urine had medicinal properties. And because of that, public urination in the baths wasn't frowned upon. It was expected. Yes, you heard that right. People would urinate directly into the pools, believing it could cure skin conditions and disinfect wounds. The ammonia levels in some bathhouses were so intense, they'd literally burn the skin and eyes. That stinging sensation? Romans thought that meant the healing had begun. But all it really did was compound the biological nightmare. Let's not forget the diseases. These weren't just unpleasant places. They were dangerous. Roman baths acted as giant incubators for infections. Skin diseases, eye infections, digestive parasites, all spread like wildfire in these damp, overcrowded environments. We're not just speculating. Archaeological evidence backs it up. When Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried Pompeii in ash, it preserved entire bathhouses, along with residue from their pools. When modern scientists analyzed those samples, they discovered shocking concentrations of bacteria linked to diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. They also found evidence of multiple types of intestinal worms. So, if you were soaking in a Roman bath, odds are something was soaking into you, too. And the irony? The wealthiest citizens, those who bathed most often, were the ones who got sick the most. The Romans were so confident in their hygiene that they never stopped to ask why people kept getting sick. They blamed everything except the obvious. Bad air, evil spirits, unbalanced diets, moral corruption. Everything got blamed, except the filthy, shared water. Medical texts from the time are both fascinating and tragic. Roman doctors wrote in detail about mysterious illnesses that plagued bathgoers. Rashes, stomach issues, eye diseases. But their advice? Take more baths. It's like seeing someone fall down a staircase and then suggesting they try it again, but faster. This wasn't a minor mistake. This was empire-wide. Millions of people across Roman territories believed they were practicing superior hygiene, while they were actually soaking themselves in an invisible swamp of infection. The scale of the delusion is mind-boggling. And here's the truly heartbreaking part. They could have done better. The Romans had incredible engineering. Their aqueducts, their sewage systems, even their understanding of water flow. They had the tools to build much cleaner bathhouses. But instead of investing in maintenance, they leaned on tradition and superstition. They believed they had reached the peak of civilization, and in that arrogance, they blinded themselves to the rotting truth beneath the marble. And still, despite all this, the baths remained wildly popular for centuries. Because they weren't just places to get clean, they were social hubs. They were where business happened, where friendships were made, where gossip flowed faster than the water. And maybe that's what makes it all the more disturbing. The Roman baths weren't some fringe experiment. They were central to Roman life. Every senator, every soldier, every citizen, they all took part in this daily ritual of ritualistic contamination. It was a society-wide hygiene theater, a massive, marble-wrapped illusion. They thought they were becoming cleaner, healthier, more civilized. But what they were really doing was soaking in sickness and calling it progress. So far, we've seen just how filthy Roman bathing culture really was. Disease-ridden pools, floating filth, and communal hygiene tools that would make a medieval barber cringe. But if you think it couldn't get any worse, think again. Because there's one part of this story that truly pushes the limits of human disgust. The full Roman bathing experience. From the moment you stepped inside to the moment you staggered out, probably less clean than when you arrived. Let's take a trip back. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, maybe a merchant or a minor bureaucrat, heading to the local Thermae, Rome's public bathhouse, to unwind after a long day. You walk through grand stone gates, toss a few quarters to the doorman, basically the cost of the day's food, and step inside, expecting relaxation, refinement, maybe even a bit of luxury. Instead, the first thing that hits you isn't the architecture or the murmur of cultured conversation. It's a smell, not just unpleasant, not just strong, but offensive. A thick, choking stench of human sweat, stale urine, rotting food, spoiled oils, and something else, something you can't quite place. Something dead. Something very, very wrong. Even Roman poets like Martial wrote about the stench. He said it could knock you out cold. And remember, this was society used to open sores. If they thought something smelled bad, it really reeked. Still, you press on. You're a Roman. After all, this is supposed to be good for you. You arrive at the apoditerium, the changing room. It's packed. Dozens of people are stripping down, leaving their belongings in little cubbies watched over by slaves. These slaves? They are not in good shape. Many are sick. Many are children. They haven't bathed themselves in weeks, and they are handling the garments of hundreds of people every day. Lice, fleas, maybe even scabies, all part of the experience. Now fully naked, you head toward the bathing sequence itself, starting with the tepidarium, the warm room. It's steamy, dark, and slippery. The walls sweat with condensation. You can barely see. The floor is slick with a mixture of water, body oil, dead skin, hair, and occasionally worse. The heat is suffocating. There are no towels, no clean surfaces, just benches coated in a perpetual film of grime. From here, it's into the calidarium, the hot room, where things go from gross to dangerous. The Romans loved to boast about their underfloor heating, hypercourse, which funneled hot air beneath the floors. Impressive, yes, but also deadly. The air was filled with soot. The smoke from constantly burning fires left walls blackened and lungs damaged. If you had asthma or weak heart, too bad. Hey, slaves would rub you down with oil, not to clean you, but to loosen up the grime. Then came the infamous strigil, a dull curved blade used to scrape the mixture of sweat, dirt, and oil from your body. But the strigil wasn't personal. Oh no, it was reused again and again on different people, barely rinse in between. What came off your back might end up on someone else's chest. The scraped off gunk, sometimes sold as medicine. Yes, you heard that right. The grime collected from the bodies of famous gladiators was bottled and sold to Roman women as beauty products. Barbaric? No, civilized, according to Roman standards. From there, you'd enter the frigidarium, the cold room, a plunge into unfiltered, stagnant water that hadn't been changed in weeks. No chlorination, no filtration, Just a communal stew of everything that had been on and in people's bodies: sweat, excrement, bodily fluids, disease. Sometimes animals were washed in the same water. Blood from animal sacrifices often found its way into nearby drains that fed into the bathhouse water system. And then there were the toilets. Roman toilets were impressive on the surface, long stone benches with holes, flush with water. But they were communal. No privacy, no paper. Just a communal sponge on a stick, soaked in vinegar, maybe. The same sponge was used by dozens of people, sometimes hundreds. And these latrines were often connected directly to the same aqueducts that supplied water to the baths. That's right, the line between bath water and wastewater was paper-thin, if it existed at all. The result? Roman baths weren't just dirty, they were disease factories. Parasites thrived. Fungal infections were rampant. Eye diseases like trachoma spread easily in the wet, enclosed spaces. And when the empire finally collapsed, the baths collapsed with it. What happened next? People got healthier. Yes, healthier. Disease rates dropped. Skin infections decreased. Infections that had plagued entire cities became rare. The so-called barbarian Middle Ages saw better hygiene in many communities than Imperial Rome ever achieved. People began washing with fresh water. They understood the importance of changing it regularly, separating toilets from living spaces, and not sitting in other people's filth for fun. But the myth of the Roman bath survived. For centuries, writers and architects look back on them with awe. Even today, Roman bath is shorthand for elegance and sophistication. We picture pristine marble, flowing fountains, relaxing steam. Never mind the bacterial soup, the communal filth, the literal poop stick. Why? Because Roman propaganda was powerful. They were master storytellers. They sold the world a vision of refinement, and the world bought it for 2,000 years. But now we know the truth. Roman baths weren't temples of cleanliness. They were monuments of cultural arrogance, massive, expensive illusions of progress that made people sick and kept them sick, all in the name of civilization. So the next time you hear someone glorify ancient Rome, remember the truth. Remember the mold, the muck, the disease. Remember the stench, the reused oil, the sponge on a stick. And ask yourself, how many things a day do we accept as civilized, simply because they look impressive? Because sometimes, civilization isn't a shining example of human progress. Sometimes it's just barbarism, cleverly disguised and very well marketed. The Romans were obsessed with their baths. Public bathhouses weren't just for getting clean. They were the social hubs of ancient life. You'd gossip, do business deals, exercise, and unwind. But behind the marble columns and heated floors was a horrifying truth. The Roman baths were less about relaxation, and more like slow, steaming petri dishes of death. Let's start in the tepidarium, the warm room. Sound cozy, right? The water was roughly body temperature, perfect for a long soak. But here's the nightmare. That same warm water had been used by hundreds of people already that day alone. There were no filters, no chemicals, no chlorine, no drainage system pumping in fresh, clean water. The bath water was changed maybe once a week, if you were lucky. More often, it was just topped off to replace what had evaporated or splashed out. This meant that every bucket of fresh water just diluted a rich, steaming broth of human leftovers. You weren't just soaking. You were marinating in a stew of dead skin cells, body oils, sweat, hair, and much worse. Imagine a gray film floating across the water's surface. That wasn't dead. That was people. Hundreds of them. Beneath that surface, invisible armies of bacteria, parasites, viruses, and fungi. A microcosmic war zone, thriving in this perfect storm of warmth and filth. But here's a part that'll make you gag. Some Romans drank the bath water. Yes, drank it. The belief was that bath water, having mingled with the essence of so many bodies, was somehow medicinal. Wealthy Romans would even bring their own cups to collect and consume it, like some grotesque health tonic. Imagine sipping a liquid that'd been swirling around in the filth of unwashed strangers. Skin flakes, body oils, sweat, pus, blood, and feces, all going down the hatch in one refreshing gulp. Still not done? Now we move to the calidarium, the hot room. Temperatures in here could soar over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. A Roman sauna designed to make you sweat. But that heat, it didn't kill bacteria. It helped them multiply. The intense warmth made everyone sweat profusely, vomit occasionally, and in some cases, lose control of their bowels. That wasn't steam you were inhaling. It was an invisible cloud of pathogens. Every cough, sneeze, and bodily fluid added to the growing horror. Now let's talk about the tools. Romans used a curved metal instrument called a strigil to scrape dirt and oil off their skin. But they shared them. Communal tools passed from one bather to the next without cleaning. Archaeologists have found strigils embedded with traces of blood, pus, and fecal matter. These weren't hygiene tools. They were biological weapons. Each scrape opened tiny wounds and introduced fresh bacteria directly into the bloodstream. Even worse were the communal sponges. Forget clean, disposable wipes. These were natural sea sponges, absorbent, porous, and used by dozens of people a day. After wiping, they were dunked into a shared bucket, releasing a dark, infectious soup of everything they'd absorbed. Then they were handed off to the next person. And the Romans found ways to make things even worse. They believed that adding substances to bath water could increase its healing powers. One of the most popular additives, blood, animal blood, especially from bulls and horses, was poured into the baths. Human blood, especially from dying gladiators, was seen as extra potent. In the warm water, the blood would coagulate into floating clumps, feeding bacterial colonies like a buffet line from hell. Then there was the urine. Romans believed both animal and human urine had purifying and medicinal properties, so it was regularly dumped into the baths. Yes, it contains ammonia, which can kill some bacteria, but not nearly enough to counterbalance the ocean of filth it was joining. Instead, it added new chemical reactions that made the water even more unpredictable and dangerous. Some elite bathhouses offered luxury treatments. Wine and honey were mixed into pools, supposedly to nourish the skin. But under heat, these organic compounds fermented rapidly. The result? Bacterial alcohol cocktails that could cause skin rashes, nausea, and chemical burns. Milk baths were another favorite. But without refrigeration, milk curdled in the heat. The result was a tub full of sour, rotting protein, floating in chunks. A bubbling cauldron of sour cheese and bacteria. Even private baths weren't safe. The wealthy, who had baths in their own homes, suffered from a different horror, lead poisoning. Roman plumbing used lead pipes extensively. Over time, lead leached into the bath water. Exposure was slow but constant. Neurological damage, kidney failure, madness. Many among the elite were literally being poisoned by the very comfort they could afford. And we know all of this because the evidence is still there. Archaeological digs in Pompeii and other Roman sites have uncovered ancient bath drains filled with sludge. Sediment analysis shows microbial contamination at levels that today would be classified as hazardous waste. Some pools were so filthy that modern scientists said even minutes of exposure would cause violent illness. Roman medical writers, like Galen, did try to warn people. He described outbreaks of rashes, fevers, intestinal worms, and infections, all traced back to public bathing. But most Romans ignored him. After all, everyone did it. And how bad could it be if it was that popular? Turns out, very bad. So, next time someone praises Roman engineering or brags about how ahead of their time they were, just remember, they voluntarily soaked, scraped, and drank from pools of disease, and called it a spa day. Part 6. The hidden horror of Roman bathing. But the nightmare of Roman bathing didn't end with the filthy water. The real terror lurked in the very tools the Romans used to cleanse themselves. Take the strigil, a curved metal scraper used to scrape oil, dirt, sweat, and dead skin from body. Sound hygienic, right? Except these strigils were shared by everyone. No sterilization, no cleaning between uses. Just one infected body scraping after another. Imagine hundreds of sweaty bathers using the same metal tool, dragging it across open pores, cuts, or rashes. One person's infection became everyone's infection. Skin diseases, boils, fungal infections, these weren't rare cases. They were common, and they spread like wildfire. The oil itself was another problem. Romans would slaughter themselves with scented olive oil before scraping it off. But again, this oil wasn't always fresh. In the larger bathhouses, the used oil was often collected, mixed, and reused, sometimes even sold as cleansing balm. It was a disgusting stew of sweat, bacteria, and bodily filth, being reapplied daily. And if that's not enough to make your skin crawl, let's talk about the bathhouse sponges, used in place of toilet paper. Yes, they shared those two. Public latrines were equipped with a stick and a sponge, sitting in a bucket of water. One person would use it, rinse it barely, and pass it along. No soap, no privacy, just shared fecal bacteria, multiplied by every user. Historians today agree this practice likely helped spread gastrointestinal diseases, intestinal parasites, and more. Yet none of this slowed the Romans down. They still believed their baths were symbols of sophistication and power. The irony? These very symbols were breeding disease on a massive scale. Even more shocking, the design of the bathhouses made everything worse. The warm, humid environment, perfect for relaxation, was also perfect for bacteria. The tepidarium and calidarium, warm and hot rooms, acted like giant incubators. And with little airflow and no disinfectants, these marble chambers turned into pathogen factories. You'd think the famously intelligent Roman engineers would have noticed. And they did, to some extent. Ancient records describe outbreaks of illness tied to specific bathhouses. Some Roman doctors even advised people to avoid frequent bathing. But no one listened. Why? Because bathing wasn't just a habit. It was an identity. To be Roman was to bathe. To reject the bath was to reject Rome itself. People who didn't participate were seen as uncivilized, even dangerous. So even when sickness followed them out of the water, they returned. Again and again. This pressure wasn't just social, it was psychological. Bathing made Romans feel superior to the so-called barbarians beyond their borders. Never mind that those same barbarians, who rarely bathed, were often healthier. In their minds, Romans were cleaner, wiser, chosen by the gods. Questioning that would mean questioning the very core of Roman civilization. And then came the children. Roman infants were brought to the baths almost as soon as they could walk. Parents thought it was healthy, a rite of passage. In reality, they were plunging their kids into a soup of deadly bacteria. Studies of Roman burial sites show shockingly high child mortality rates, especially in cities with large bath complexes. Meanwhile, rural children, who bathed less, often lived longer. The engineering marvels that powered Roman baths only made it worse. Their hypercore systems, underground heating, kept baths warm, but also created ideal breeding grounds for bacteria like Legionella. Their clever water circulation meant that one contaminated source could infect dozens of baths in a single complex. Even the architecture betrayed them. Closed spaces, high humidity, no ventilation, perfect conditions for airborne diseases. And those gorgeous marble walls? Porous. They soaked up water, filth, and bacteria that couldn't be fully cleaned with ancient tools. Every corner of a Roman bath was a health hazard disguised as luxury. So what happens when an entire civilization ignores the evidence in front of them? Disease became chronic. People walked around with weakened immune systems, vulnerable to every new illness that entered the empire. Plague swept through cities with terrifying speed, killing thousands. Roman doctors tried to fight it, but their knowledge was no match for the complexity of the problem. And still, the people kept bathing. They didn't stop because they couldn't. Bathing had become sacred, a cultural ritual too beloved to question. So instead, they blamed everything else, foreigners, the gods, fate. Anything but the truth. This wasn't just a public health failure. It was a civilizational blind spot. Even when Roman officials documented the health risks of the baths, nothing changed. The warnings were ignored. The illnesses were rebranded as divine punishment or personal weakness. People would rather suffer and die than admit that their most celebrated tradition was killing them. And that's the chilling part. The fall of Rome wasn't just about invasions or political collapse. It was also about stubbornness, an entire empire unable to rethink its own identity. The Roman bath system is more than a curiosity. It's a warning, a lesson in what happens when cultural pride becomes more important than truth, when comfort blinds people to danger. When a civilization is so convinced of its greatness that it willingly poisons itself to maintain the illusion. Rome didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it refused to change. So before we laugh at the ancient world, we should ask, what are our modern equivalents? What practices do we cling to today, despite the evidence, because they make us feel superior, safe, or civilized? Because if the Romans could do it, we can too. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a grand Roman bath after a long, exhausting day. You're ready to wash away the grime of the city, but first comes a ritual unlike anything we do today. You reach for a strigil, a curved metal tool used to scrape dirt, sweat, and oil from your skin. Sounds simple enough, right? But here's the shocking truth. These scrapers weren't personal. They were shared, passed from one bather to the next, without any cleaning or sterilization. Imagine what that means. Layers upon layers of dead skin, sweat, oil, and worse, blood from cuts or infections, clinging to the metal, ready to be dragged across fresh skin. This wasn't just a little unhygienic. It was a breeding ground for bacteria, parasites, and disease. Bathers unknowingly rubbed their bodies with the remnants of countless strangers' infections. If that sounds bad, the communal sponges were even worse. Attached to sticks and soaked in vinegar or salt water, these sponges were used for the most private of hygiene tasks. One person's intimate cleansing was followed immediately by another's. No cleaning, no sterilization, just shared use. These sponges soaked up everything: bodily fluids, feces, menstrual blood, pus from infections, and all manner of human waste. Archaeologists have found evidence that these sponges often teemed with intestinal worms, tapeworms, roundworms, nasty parasites that thrived in the damp, vinegar-soaked environment. Far from killing germs, the acidic vinegar sometimes preserved deadly pathogens, making the next bather's infection even more severe. Romans believed deeply in their bathing rituals. They thought certain additives in the water had magical health benefits. Wealthy Romans bathed in wine, convinced it preserved their youth and beauty. Others added honey, milk, or even the blood of freshly killed animals. The blood of gladiators was especially prized, thought to transfer strength and vitality to those who soaked in it. But nothing quite compares to their most disturbing practice, bathing in urine. Yes, urine. Romans collected urine, especially from young boys or virgins, aged it in vats, and added it to their bath water. They believed the ammonia would cleanse and whiten the skin. In reality, this created a toxic mix that burned skin and eyes and provided a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. The richest took these bizarre practices even further. Emperor Caligula famously bathed in oils perfumed with the ground bones of his enemies. Nero was said to soak in a strange mixture of wine, rose petals, and the blood of young slaves. These weren't strange exceptions, but part of a widespread belief that exotic, grotesque additives could enhance bathing. Even the incredible Roman engineering behind the baths was a source of danger. Water flowed through vast aqueducts and pipes, but these often picked up pollutants along the way. Lead pipes slowly poisoned the water with toxic metals, while dead animals, human waste, and industrial runoff contaminated the supply. The famous hypercourse heating system, which circulated hot air under the floors to warm the baths, also spread poisonous fumes. Bathers unknowingly breathed in carbon monoxide and other toxic gases, causing slow poisoning and lung damage over time. Sanitation was a nightmare. Fresh water and sewage traveled through the same network of pipes. Heavy rains or system failures caused sewage to back up into clean water supply. The mighty Cloaca Maxima, Rome's massive sewer, sometimes overflowed into the Tiber River, which fed some baths, spreading contamination even further. These hazards hit the most vulnerable the hardest. Children and slaves had no choice but to use these baths and suffered terribly. Infant mortality was shockingly high, partly because of diseases caught in these so-called hygienic places. Slave children were sometimes used as human guinea pigs, tested with new bathing mixtures before their masters dared try them themselves. Even the wealthy weren't safe. Though they had better nutrition and medical care, archaeological digs reveal signs of parasitic infections, heavy metal poisoning, and waterborne diseases in their remains. Roman baths, which seemed like a symbol of luxury and health, were in truth a dangerous and filthy environment, a place where illness spread freely under the guise of cleanliness and ritual. Even among Rome's elite, the very practices they trusted to keep them healthy and beautiful was silently destroying them from the inside. Roman doctors like Galen and Cellus warned repeatedly about the dangers of public bathing, yet their advice was mostly ignored. They noticed that frequent bathers often suffered from skin diseases, respiratory troubles, digestive issues, and what today would call systemic poisoning. Despite these warnings, the social pressure to join the bathing craze was so intense that even medical professionals couldn't resist the allure of the baths, continuing to use them despite knowing the risks. When the Roman Empire fell, so did these public health disasters. The aqueducts broke down, and the grand bathhouses crumbled. Interestingly, medieval Europeans, who bathed far less often, ended up healthier in many ways. Without the constant exposure to contaminated water, they avoided the rampant spread of disease that had plagued Rome for centuries. Roman baths offer a chilling lesson. Incredible engineering and technological advancement mean nothing without scientific understanding. The Romans built awe-inspiring structures with sophisticated water systems, but their ignorance about germs turned these marvels into death traps. Their cultural pride blinded them to the damage they were doing to their own health. This isn't just a story from the past. It's a warning about the dangers of confusing complexity with progress. Just because something is elaborate doesn't mean it's better. The Roman bathing culture was so deeply embedded in their society that no one dared question it, even as evidence piled up showing how harmful it really was. Now, you might think the wealthy Romans, with their vast resources, avoided these hygiene disasters. After all, they had access to the finest oils, the best slaves, and the most luxurious bathing facilities. But in reality, their pursuit of luxury created even greater health risks. Elite Romans didn't just bathe. They performed elaborate rituals lasting hours. Imagine a Roman senator arriving at the baths of Caracalla, bringing his own slave, a silver strigil, a special scraping tool, and a collection of rare oils imported from distant lands. He believed he was engaging in the height of civilized cleanliness, but in truth, he was stepping into a nightmare of germs and infection. These private baths were often even worse than public ones. The wealthy had rituals that unintentionally made conditions perfect for spreading disease. They soaked for hours in the same water, softening their skin and making it easier for infections to take hold. They scraped their bodies vigorously with their expensive strigils, creating tiny wounds that served as open doors for bacteria. Perhaps the worst part was their obsession with communal massages and body treatments. Teams of slaves would massage them with oils reused by dozens of other bathers. These oils, stored in shared containers and applied with unwashed hands, became concentrated broths of pathogens. The massage tables, made from porous materials, absorbed sweat, fluids, and waste impossible to sanitize properly. Archaeologists have uncovered grim evidence of these health risks. Excavations of luxurious Roman villas have revealed human remains showing signs of chronic infections, parasites, and diseases linked to contaminated water and poor hygiene. One haunting discovery near Pompeii was the remains of an entire family who likely died from a bacterial infection transmitted through their bathing water. The tragic irony is that these wealthy Romans thought they were buying health and purity through their extravagant rituals. They hired personal bath attendants, commissioned dazzling mosaics of their private baths, and imported exotic oils, all while unknowingly poisoning themselves. Their luxury was built on a foundation of ignorance about how diseases spread. Even Emperor Hadrian, one of Rome's most famous rulers and a devoted fan of baths, was not immune. His passion for bathing symbolized the height of Roman sophistication, yet it likely exposed him and those around him to countless hidden dangers. The story of Roman baths reminds us that innovation without understanding can lead to disaster. The Romans mastered engineering but failed at basic hygiene. Their belief that complexity and tradition equaled progress blinded them to the risks that were destroying their health and, eventually, their empire. In the end, the most advanced civilization of its time became one of the deadliest, all because of a culture obsessed with status and luxury over simple, effective health practices. Roman bathing was much more than just cleanliness. It was a way of life for the wealthy elite, a symbol of status, luxury, and health. They believed spending entire days moving from one pool to another, indulging in various treatments, made them stronger and healthier. But the truth was far more dangerous. Medical historians studying the final years of some of these elite bathers noticed symptoms that aligned with chronic infections, illnesses likely caused by the contaminated water they so frequently soaked in. Though their deaths were officially recorded as natural causes, These signs reveal a hidden epidemic fueled by their bathing habits. The Romans didn't just bathe, they innovated. They created heated pools so hot that beneficial skin bacteria were wiped out, while harmful germs thrived. They built complex systems to cycle water between hot and cold pools. Sounds clever, right? But this just spread contaminated water faster, turning the baths into breeding grounds for disease. Perhaps the most alarming practice was competitive bathing. Groups of wealthy Romans would challenge each other to endure the hottest water, the roughest scrapes, or the longest soaks. These contests pushed them to expose themselves to increasingly dangerous levels of contamination. Ironically, those who fell sick with the worst infections were seen as having undergone a kind of spiritual cleansing. Roman doctors, including the famous Galen, were among the first to notice the health toll of these habits. They documented recurring skin problems, digestive illnesses, and hot fevers, now understood as bacterial infections, afflicting the frequent bathers. But instead of stopping, the wealthy doubled down, convinced they simply hadn't bathed enough or used the correct oils and techniques. This created a vicious cycle. The sickest bathers bathed more often, re-exposing themselves and spreading germs to others. The financial cost was staggering. Wealthy families poured fortunes into exotic cures, expensive medical treatments, and religious rituals, hoping to heal ailments caused by their very own bathing customs. They even sent expeditions abroad searching for rare herbs and minerals, unaware the real cure was simply to avoid contaminated water. Bathing became wrapped in myth and superstition. Romans believed certain oils, waters, and rituals could cure any disease. Some bathed in wine, thinking its alcohol would purify them, though it wasn't strong enough to kill bacteria and actually fed harmful germs with its sugar. Others added bizarre substances to their baths, like ground pearls, animal blood, and even human breast milk. These concoctions turned pools into petri dishes for infection, all while giving bathers a false sense of health. The tragedy deepened as children were brought into these elaborate rituals. Wealthy parents thought they were protecting their kids, but instead exposed them to dangerous pathogens. Child mortality rates among frequent bathers were much higher than average, though Romans blamed everything except their baths. Elite Roman women faced their own perils. Their beauty routines involved long soaks in various mixtures, intense scraping, and layers of cosmetics, all performed in these contaminated waters. The result? Chronic skin infections, reproductive health issues, and ailments that Roman medicine couldn't fix. Why did these harmful practices persist? It reveals a powerful truth about human nature and social status. Even as signs of illness became clear, the wealthy couldn't abandon the rituals that defined their sophistication and civilization. Bathing was more than hygiene, it was identity. Questioning it was nearly impossible. In the end, the story of Roman bathing is a cautionary tale about how cultural pride and social competition can blind people to danger, even when it threatens their health and lives. The story of Roman baths is one of history's biggest ironies. Imagine a civilization with all the money, technology, and even some medical knowledge needed to stay clean and healthy, but instead, they created something deadly. The Romans built grand bathing complexes with beautiful marble walls, intricate mosaics, and clever heating systems. To us today, they look like symbols of luxury and sophistication. But behind the stunning beauty was a dangerous truth. These baths were essentially elaborate death traps. The wealthy Romans had the resources to improve hygiene. They could have built private baths with fresh running water and proper drainage. They could have hired doctors to study how bathing affected health. They could have developed safer ways to enjoy cleanliness. But they were trapped by their own cultural beliefs, myths that convinced them communal bathing was not just healthy, but vital to their status and identity. Instead of understanding the dangers, they kept doing the same risky rituals. Pools of water weren't drained daily. The same filthy water sat stagnant for weeks or months, filled with layers of human waste, sweat, and decaying matter that would horrify any modern health inspector. And the bathing rituals? Some Romans soaked in pools filled with spoiled milk or mixed wine with blood, believing it would keep them young. Others added crushed animal organs to their baths, convinced this gave them strength. The more bizarre the ritual, the more they thought it was good for their health. But the worst was the communal tools. Bathers shared bronze scrapers called strigils to remove dirt and oil from their skin. These tools were never cleaned properly and passed germs from one person to another, spreading infections fast. Even worse were the communal sponges on sticks used for washing. The same sponge cleaned dozens of bodies daily, soaking up every kind of bacteria, virus, and parasite imaginable. Scientists today estimate that a single one of these sponges could carry over 1 million harmful microbes. The Romans also moved between different temperature pools: the freezing cold frigidarium, the mild tepidarium, and the hot calidarium. But this only made things worse. The rapid changes in temperature forced contaminated water deep into their skin, opening the door to dangerous bacteria, especially those that thrived in the hot pools. When the Roman Empire finally fell, it wasn't because they realized the baths were dangerous. It was because the empire's collapse made it impossible to maintain these grand complexes. Wealthy survivors had to live with much simpler, more basic washing habits, which ironically probably saved their lives. The legacy of Roman baths teaches us something important. Having resources and technology isn't enough if cultural beliefs blind us to the truth. The Romans created a system where luxury and status came at the cost of health and safety. They convinced themselves that the very things killing them, dirty water, shared tools, bizarre rituals, were the key to vitality and life. So next time you see the ruins of a Roman bath, remember, they are monuments not just to architectural genius, but also to one of history's deadliest cultural delusions. This is a cautionary tale about how even the smartest societies can fall victim to their own blind spots. It reminds us to question traditions and not confuse style or sophistication with real wisdom. Roman baths were more than just places to wash. They were the beating heart of Roman social life, bustling centers where citizens gathered to relax, gossip, and indulge in luxury. But beneath the marble splendor and soothing steam lurked a horrifying truth. These beloved bathhouses were deadly incubators of disease. Archaeological excavations of ancient Roman bath complexes reveal a grim legacy. Layers of sediment from their drainage systems teem with parasite eggs and pathogens that would terrify any modern scientist. Eggs from intestinal worms, traces of malaria parasites, and bacteria responsible for dysentery, typhoid, and even plague have all been uncovered. The concentration of these infectious agents was so extreme that today's labs must handle these samples under the strictest containment protocols. This hidden horror was no accident. The Roman obsession with communal bathing in warm, nutrient-rich waters created perfect breeding grounds for microbes and parasites. Rather than promoting health, these baths became death traps, silently spreading chronic infections that weakened entire populations. Some historians argue this public health disaster contributed significantly to the empire's slow decline. Yet, the Romans were not completely blind to the dangers. Medical texts from the era reveal a stark contradiction. Galen, the famous physician to emperors, documented a mysterious bath fever afflicting frequent bathers, violent stomach cramps, skin eruptions, and, in the worst cases, death within days. Galen observed that many who indulged in these baths suffered from a wasting disease, bodies growing thin despite access to ample food, a condition we now know was caused by chronic parasitic infections combined with heavy metal poisoning. In an effort to save Roman society from this creeping death, Galen advocated for reforms: shorter soaks, cooler water, and individual bathing vessels instead of communal pools. He warned how infection spread through shared waters and described countless cases of sudden collapses and deaths inside the baths themselves. But his warnings fell on deaf ears. For Romans, the bath was sacred. They were the epicenter of social and cultural life. To question the baths was to question Rome itself. The wealthy dismissed Galen's concerns, confident their exclusive additives and private facilities shielded them from the invisible threats commoners faced. This tragic arrogance is frozen in time by discoveries at Pompeii. In the Villa of Papyrus, preserved beneath volcanic ash, researchers found a wealthy family's remains riddled with parasitic infections and catastrophic lead poisoning. Even the bath chamber held skeletal remains of previous bathers who had died suddenly and were simply left where they fell, their bodies covered with lime and forgotten. The scale of this catastrophe expands further when examining the infrastructure behind Roman bathing. The vast aqueducts carried water laced not only with natural minerals, but also with agricultural runoff, human waste, and industrial pollution. Lead pipes, prized for their durability, poisoned every drop with toxic metal. By the time water flowed into the baths, it was already a deadly cocktail. Roman ingenuity in heating systems only worsened matters. The hypercore system, a marvel of ancient engineering designed to heat pools and floors, created ideal conditions for bacterial growth. Warm, stagnant waters became hotbeds for microbes, while steam inhaled by bathers carried airborne pathogens straight into their lungs. Contemporary medical records from Roman hospitals chronicle the devastation. Epidemics of dysentery regularly swept through neighborhoods after large gatherings at baths. Mysterious skin diseases caused flesh to rot and fall away, all traced back to contaminated water exposure. Perhaps most hauntingly, doctors noted sharp rises in miscarriages and birth defect among women who bathed frequently, a tragedy we now understand was linked to heavy metal poisoning. Desperate to cling to their cherished rituals, Rome's elite devised elaborate, though ultimately futile, protective measures. Some employed professional bath tasters, slaves tasked with sampling water to detect poisons, a grim testament to the peril lurking in every pool. In the end, the Roman bath was a paradox, a place of luxury and relaxation, but also a deadly trap. This tragic irony reminds us that even the most advanced civilizations can be undone by unseen enemies, microbes, toxins, and cultural habits that outpace medical wisdom. The story of Roman baths is a chilling cautionary tale about the hidden dangers behind comfort and tradition. The deadly secret of Roman baths, how luxury turned lethal. Roman baths were the pinnacle of ancient luxury, vast, elegant complexes where people bathed, socialized, and relaxed. But beneath the gleaming marble and steaming pools lurked a hidden horror. These baths were slowly poisoning their users. Imagine this. Before anyone dared to dip a toe into the water, someone had to test it first, a brave soul willing to risk immediate danger just to make sure the pools were safe. But safe was a relative term. Many Romans invested heavily in exotic filtering systems, layering silk, charcoal, and even ground pearls into the water, desperate to purify it. Yet all these efforts were futile. Unknown to them, the very materials that heated and carried the water, lead pipes and toxic heating systems, turned clean water into a deadly cocktail. The tragedy deepened as the Romans' faith in their bathing rituals blinded them to the mounting evidence of danger. When entire families fell ill or even died after visiting the baths, people didn't blame the water or the bathhouses. Instead, they chalked it up to divine punishment or bad air, bad humors circulating in the steam. When slaves who cleaned the bath collapsed and died, the public saw it as proof of their inferior constitution, not exposure to toxic conditions. This extreme denial was more than just superstition. Romans would literally step over the bodies of those who perished in the baths just to continue their rituals. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The very places meant for health and rejuvenation were silently killing thousands. Why didn't anyone put an end to this deadly charade? The answer lies in economics. The bath industry employed thousands, from attendants and masseurs to perfume vendors and food sellers, all thriving on the bath's popularity. Shutting them down would have caused economic ruin for many, including the elite who profited handsomely. So, the baths stayed open, their toxic legacy passed down generation after generation. By the late Imperial period, Rome's population was in crisis. Birth rates plummeted, life expectancy dropped, and chronic diseases ran rampant. Yet the baths remained, filled with the same contaminated water, enveloped in the same toxic steam, their drains clogged with deadly sediment. The fall of Rome is often blamed on military defeats or political chaos, but archaeological evidence reveals a slower, more insidious enemy, the baths themselves. These marvels of engineering, celebrated for their sophistication, were in fact slow-motion killers. The Romans' obsession with bathing, combined with ignorance of hygiene and poisonous building materials, created a public health disaster that weakened the empire from within. The darkest proof comes from ancient doctors like Solace of Ephesus, who documented what he called the wasting sickness of the baths. His writings describe symptoms now recognizable as severe lead poisoning mixed with chronic infections. Patients suffered paleness, trembling hands, weakness, foul breath, and strange skin discoloration spreading beneath the flesh, all signs of a body ravaged by poison. Even Roman poets mocked the deadly addiction. Martial, famous for his biting wit, satirized a senator who entered the bath robust as an ox but emerged pale as a funeral shroud, only to return the next day, drawn like a slave to invisible chains. The warm waters, while soothing the pain caused by poisoning, hooked people into a vicious cycle of dependency, trapping them in a toxic environment. Excavations at Pompeii tell a similar story. Skeletons found near bath complexes showed bone deformities consistent with heavy lead toxicity. What the Romans thought of as technological brilliance, the intricate heating system called the hypercourse, was in reality a sophisticated delivery system for poison. So, while Rome built some of the most impressive bathing facilities in history, these very wonders became monuments to human folly. The deadly consequences of their bathing culture remind us that no matter how advanced or cherished a tradition is, ignorance and denial can turn it into a weapon against ourselves. As we uncover more of this toxic legacy, it forces us to ask, what modern customs might we be blindly trusting today, unaware of the hidden dangers beneath the surface? Imagine stepping into a warm Roman bath, surrounded by beautiful mosaics and frescoes, a place designed for relaxation and socializing. But beneath this luxurious surface was a deadly secret. The Romans had unknowingly created toxic hotboxes, places where poison and disease flourished. Here's how it happened. Roman baths used an ingenious network of furnaces and vents that heated floors and walls. This clever heating system unfortunately also circulated lead vapor into the air. Lead, a deadly poison, slowly seeped from the pipes, walls, and even the decorative bronze fixtures into the water and air. The hotter the bath, the more lead was released. Wealthy Romans, who loved their long, steaming soaks in private baths, were actually bathing in a cloud of toxic lead fumes. Chemical tests on Roman bath ruins today reveal lead levels so high they would trigger immediate evacuation by modern health standards. Even the beautiful paints on the walls were made with lead-based pigments, which flaked off into the water. The Romans' obsession with hot water was poisoning them. But it wasn't just lead making these baths dangerous. The warm, stagnant pools created perfect breeding grounds for deadly bacteria. Legionella, the bacteria behind severe pneumonia, thrived here. Another, called Pseudomonas, caused painful skin and eye infections. Shared bath towels and tools helped spread hepatitis, tuberculosis, and countless other diseases from person to person. Modern scientists analyzing ancient DNA from bath sites uncovered an alarming list of illnesses, cholera, typhoid, and even early forms of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The first superbugs in history were born in Roman baths. The social scene in the baths made disease unstoppable. Slaves who cleaned and maintained the baths were often sick themselves, spreading infections as they worked. Wealthy bathers arrived with attendants and masseurs, crowding the pools and spreading germs rapidly. Romans often held business meetings and social events in the baths, so sick people never stayed home, bringing their illnesses directly into the communal water. Women faced their own hazards. Many used cosmetics packed with lead, mercury, and arsenic. These poisons dissolved into the bath water, creating a toxic stew. Women applied these deadly cosmetics right in the baths, unknowingly exposing themselves and others to harmful chemicals. Pregnancy complications and infant deaths soared among upper-class women, linked directly to these dangerous beauty practices. The Roman military wasn't spared either. Soldiers living in forts with baths suffered more illness and death than those without. Military hospitals near bathhouses reported mysterious fevers and wasting diseases, likely caused by mass lead poisoning. Archaeologists digging up Roman cemeteries found skeletons showing signs of chronic illness, bone deformities, and premature death, especially in regions with extensive bath complexes. The very comforts of civilization were slowly killing the people who used them. Some Romans, including famous physicians like Galen, warned about the dangers of excessive bathing, but their warnings were ignored. When entire families fell ill after visiting new baths, people blamed bad air or angry gods, not the bath themselves. Roman engineers even boasted about water systems now known to be contaminated, proud of the sweet taste of lead-poisoned water and the warm, bacteria-filled pools. This cultural blindness was deadly. Economic pressures made change impossible. Thousands depended on baths for their jobs, and wealthy families made huge profits. Admitting baths were unsafe would have destroyed an important industry. Instead, the Romans built bigger, hotter, more elaborate baths, perfect death traps. By the height of the empire, Roman bath culture was a toxic storm of deadly engineering mistakes, dangerous social habits, and stubborn denial. Each improvement made things worse. Better heating meant more lead vapor, stronger water flow spread disease faster, and larger crowds increased infections. The worst part? Romans believed these toxic rituals were essential for their health and status. They couldn't imagine life without baths, even as they were slowly poisoning themselves. Roman baths weren't just places of relaxation. They were silent killers, breeding grounds for superbugs, and traps of toxic engineering, all wrapped in luxury and tradition. As the Roman Empire stretched its power across 3 continents, a strange and deadly irony was unfolding beneath its gleaming marble facades. The very baths, those grand symbols of Roman civilization and sophistication, were quietly undermining the empire's health and longevity. What started as centers of hygiene and social life had become unwitting laboratories of decay, slowly poisoning the elite who indulged in their pleasures the most. In the sprawling baths of Caracalla, where up to 1,600 bathers mingled daily, troubling signs emerged. Mortality rates among frequent visitors rose sharply, baffling physicians and senators alike. The wealthiest Romans, who bathed daily in steamy pools and lavish chambers, were dying younger than their ancestors, once thought to be more primitive. It was a grim paradox. The rituals meant to display Roman greatness were silently eating away at its people. Marcus Aurelius Severus, a respected senator with a keen eye for detail, kept careful records of his family's health. He grew alarmed as those closest to him, his eldest son and daughter, fell victim to strange ailments after embracing the luxurious bathing routines. His son developed trembling hands, a symptom doctors linked to lead poisoning. His daughter suffered relentless digestive problems, immune to even the finest treatments money could buy. These cases were far from isolated. Across the empire, the privileged few who bathed most often were struck by mysterious wasting diseases, chronic fatigue, and mental decline. Noble children raised in this culture of indulgence lagged behind their rural cousins in growth and vitality. The empire's shining bathhouses, rather than strengthening Rome, were accelerating its decline from within. Why? The answer lay hidden in the very waters Romans cherished. Their thermal springs, bubbling through lead-rich geological formations, carried deadly minerals straight into the pools. Roman engineers, marveling at the smooth flow of water through their extensive lead pipes, unknowingly allowed toxic metals to seep into daily life. The metallic taste of the water was misinterpreted as proof of healing power. Strong mineral content was celebrated, never questioned. Archaeologists digging through Pompeii and Herculaneum have uncovered bone samples from wealthy residents with dangerously high lead levels, far exceeding what we now know to be safe. The elaborate heating systems of the baths, hailed as feats of Roman engineering, created warm, humid environments ideal for bacteria to thrive, turning these public spaces into breeding ground for infectious diseases. Roman doctors were aware something was amiss. Galen, the empire's most renowned medical expert, described bath fever, a mysterious illness that struck frequent bathers with symptoms remarkably similar to heavy metal poisoning combined with persistent bacterial infections. Yet, despite growing concerns, no one could pinpoint the true cause. Cultural pride made the baths untouchable. To question the practice was to question Rome itself. Even when whispers of danger spread, social pressure forced people to maintain appearances. No one wanted to be seen as less Roman by skipping the baths. So, they kept bathing even as their bodies paid the price. The result was a slow-motion apocalypse hidden behind marble columns and golden mosaics. The baths, once proud emblems of Roman achievement, were quietly eroding the empire's future, its lifeblood turned toxic, its rituals deadly. This dark chapter of history reminds us how progress can sometimes mask destruction, and how the things we hold dear can, in time, become the agents of our downfall. Imagine a culture so proud of its bathing rituals that to appear unwashed was to risk being seen as barbaric, uncivilized, or even impoverished. This was ancient Rome, a civilization that built magnificent public baths as symbols of status, cleanliness, and sophistication. But beneath the grandeur of these colossal bathhouses lay a dark, deadly secret. The cultural shame attached to poor hygiene was so powerful that many Romans chose to risk their health rather than face social rejection. Especially women of the upper classes, whose beauty depended on elaborate bathing routines. These rituals involved the application of cosmetics loaded with mercury, lead, and other poisons. Soaked skin absorbed these toxic substances far more easily, meaning that the very acts meant to enhance their appearance were quietly eroding their health and fertility. Behind the scenes, a sprawling economy had sprung up around the bathing industry, thousands employed in building, maintaining, and running the baths, vast supply chains importing exotic oils, perfumes, and marble. The financial stakes were enormous. and so powerful that anyone who dared question the safety of these practices was swiftly silenced. A few courageous physicians warned about the dangers of contaminated water and excessive bathing, but their voices were crushed by political pressure and economic interests. Speaking out meant professional ruin and social exile. What the Roman Empire showcased with architectural grandeur, luxurious pools, steaming rooms, and elegant marble chambers, masked a biological disaster unfolding inside. The more complex the bath complexes became, the more they facilitated the spread of disease. Pools, interconnected rooms, and stagnant water created perfect conditions for bacteria, parasites, and toxic substances to circulate among the bathers. Despite possessing advanced knowledge, they understood the importance of fresh water, engineered aqueducts with filtration systems, and mastered precise construction techniques. Roman cultural beliefs about how to bathe prevented them from using their technology to protect public health. They valued tradition over science, appearances over safety, and this fatal combination turned their beloved baths into deadly traps. The consequences were devastating. Chronic exposure to polluted water and toxic cosmetics inflicted neurological damage on generations of Romans, contributing to the cognitive decline observed in the empire's final centuries. Erratic emperors, failing military commanders, and collapsing administrations might all be partially traced back to this silent poisoning. Archaeological digs reveal cemeteries with high rates of birth defects, developmental disorders, and early deaths, particularly in communities near public baths. The very institutions meant to symbolize Rome's civilization were eroding its human capital from within. The tragedy of the Roman baths is a powerful lesson about how cultural pride and technological skill can combine to cause systemic harm. The empire that built roads lasting millennia and a legal system influencing the modern world was, ironically, undone partly by its unwillingness to question a treasured tradition that was slowly killing its people. And here's the darkest twist. Those who bathed most often, the wealthy elite, were in fact exposing themselves to the greatest risks. For Rome's upper class, visiting the baths was not an occasional indulgence but a daily ritual. They would spend hours soaking, believing that longer exposure meant better health, greater prestige, and refinement. What they didn't realize was that they were effectively marinating themselves in a toxic cocktail of heavy metals, bacteria, and human waste. The very practices designed to demonstrate Roman sophistication and superiority ultimately accelerated the empire's decline. The baths stand as a haunting monument, a reminder that progress without wisdom and tradition without critical thought can have catastrophic consequences. Real civilization demands not only technological achievement, but a commitment to human welfare and the courage to question even the most cherished customs. The wealthy of ancient Rome enjoyed the finest baths, lavish palaces of steam and luxury, equipped with the most sophisticated heating systems and filled with exotic oils and salts from distant lands. But behind this grandeur hid a deadly secret. These premium baths were not the sanctuaries of health they seemed to be. Instead, they were poison chambers in disguise. The very pipes that delivered the hot water to the elite, the bronze and lead conduits, slowly leaked toxic metals right into the baths. The perfumes and oils they drenched themselves in were laced with mercury and other harmful substances. Even the exotic salts, imported from faraway places, often carried dangerous minerals. What was meant to cleanse a body was quietly contaminating it. Roman women, especially those of high status, took this poisoning to an art form. Their cosmetics contained white lead powder to pale their faces, antimony to darken their eyes, and mercury-based rouge to tint their lips. These weren't harmless beauty treatments. They were toxic poisons. And in the steamy, humid atmosphere of the baths, these substances didn't just sit on the skin. They penetrated deep, seeping into the bloodstream and lodging in vital organs. The cool irony is breathtaking. Those who considered themselves superior, who flaunted their status through these extravagant bathing rituals, were actually doing far more harm to themselves than the poorest peasants who couldn't afford such luxuries. The marble pools of the wealthy were more contaminated than the rough wooden tubs of the poor. The exotic additives of the elite were far more poisonous than simple water, and the long hours they spent bathing increased their exposure to disease and toxins. Medical writers of the time began to notice alarming patterns. The rich were dying younger than expected. They suffered from strange wasting diseases, neurological problems, and organ failures that seemed closely linked to their bathing habits. Some physicians issued warnings. Don't bathe too often. Don't stay too long in hot water. Avoid excessive cosmetics and perfumes. But these cautions were ignored. Why? Because the baths were not just about cleanliness, they were about identity, power, and prestige. To question the safety of these rituals was to challenge the very core of Roman society. It was like telling proud Americans today that democracy might be flawed, or telling the British that tea might be harmful. The social pressure to conform and maintain appearances was simply too strong. So, generation after generation, the Roman elite continued their toxic routines. They passed down not only their wealth, but their deadly habits. Aristocratic families showed signs of what modern science now recognizes as chronic heavy metal poisoning, mental decline, fertility problems, shortened lifespans, even genetic defects. The very people who should have been the peak of human achievement were slowly deteriorating in front of everyone's eyes. What makes this even more tragic is that some Romans did understand the dangers. A handful of physicians and philosophers documented the links between the baths and illness. They warned about the lead pipes, the harmful cosmetics, and the risks of excessive bathing. But their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of cultural pride and conformity. So the Roman Empire marched on, unknowingly poisoning its leadership class, one luxurious bath at a time. The baths, which were supposed to symbolize civilization and purity, instead became instruments of self-destruction. What was meant to demonstrate superiority only revealed the deadly cost of arrogance and ignorance. When we think about why Rome fell, we usually point to barbarian invasions, economic troubles, or political chaos. But perhaps we should also consider this darker truth: a civilization so confident in its greatness that it ignored the poison flowing through its veins. The Roman baths weren't just dirty or risky. They were a perfect symbol of how advanced technology and cultural pride can combine to create the most insidious forms of ruin. And that, perhaps, is the most disturbing lesson of all. The Romans knew better. They could have done better. But they chose to bathe in their own decline, convinced until the very end that they were the most civilized people who ever lived.